but I won't. All right, so this is a class about the Zufechten, and I've cheekily named it Approaching the Zufechten, because if you know what Zufechten means, it's a joke. It's a pun. Right? So, start off, so Zufechten is like breaking the word up. It literally means like to the fencing, right? And one of the sort of common things in German at the time, or in various dialects of German at the time, they use that sort of little term, like to mean sort of approaching or starting or beginning or something like that. So a toast to somebody's health would be like zum Wohl, right? To your health. Or zu trinken was literally to the drink. You'd start drinking, right? That was the thing you'd do after work and whatnot. So that sort of formulation it's a bit of an abstraction, and the idea is that you are approaching the beginning of the fencing phase of the fight, right? So who can tell me where, at what range, the Zufechten begins? Because this is really important, and Meyer is very specific about where you put your hand down. I know you know. You put your hand down. All right, does anybody know? I mean, and LLG people, obviously you don't count either because I talk about it all the time. So it's literally, he says it word for word in the book. He gives you exactly where the sort of outside range of the Zufechten begins. Stop.
Cricket.
All right, yeah, do you know? No, he's more specific than that.
It's like two lengths of like if you're both in long point.
Maybe more specific.
Words. It's when
Demonstrate with this. You're very close. It's just about here, right? That is Zufechten. So if both fencers, I hope that's on the camera, but if not, whatever. If both fencers are standing with their swords extended in long point or Grafensatzung or whatever you want to call it, the thing with your swords out, and they're crossing at the weak, that's the Zufechten, right? So there are certain things that happen in that phase of the fight, right? And there are how many phases of the fight in Meyer? Yeah, there's three, right? So there's the Zufechten, right? The approach.
Oh man, you gotta go. This guy's gonna get his whole class.
you're out. You're being evaluated. You're out.
There's obviously the handwork or the middle, and then there's the Abzug, right? And this is slightly different than the earlier German stuff, which uses the Krieg as the close fight, and it doesn't mention Abzug as far as I know, right? Obviously, you're expected to withdraw even if you're doing early German stuff, but those are the phases, right? You have the approach, you have the phase at which the fight all takes place, the handwork in the middle, and then you withdraw. And when you withdraw to a range beyond this one, and the fight's over, right? So if I'm at this range, even if I'm fencing somebody, we're not fencing yet, at all. We're not even close, right? There's nothing he can do to me with a sword that he can do fast enough that I can't respond. Even if he could throw the sword, right? I have plenty of time to just knock it out of the air, right? There's nothing he can do. But we have to think about the fight starting at this range because we have this whole approach phase that we can use for various reasons. So what's one way you can influence your opponent at this range without actually being able to touch them, without actually being able to be touched by them or be threatened by them, right? You're too far away to do anything physically. But what's a way we can use this range envelope to fence better?
Make them angry. Call their mom a dirty word.
Sure. Yeah, you can do that.
Stomp on the ground.
Postures. Yeah. You show off, right? So one of the things that we no longer really have in kind of our sense of conflict is the idea that prior to like shooting beyond the horizon artillery and airstrikes and radar guided missiles and stuff like that, is that there's so little you can do to armies that are approaching you when you have this whole phase where they're visible but they're untouchable, right? And so one of the reasons there are many, but one of the reasons for having really bright uniforms and big peacock feathers and huge flags and stuff is because if you can use that phase to show the guys who are standing there waiting for you to get there that you are fucking tough and you mean business and you're really well trained and experienced, you don't give a shit, they might break and run away before you even get there. And that would be perfect, right? And so the idea is that you can use the Zufechten to have that effect on your opponent. You can look so confident and have so much swagger and look so, competent that they're like, oh shit, I'm gonna fucking lose, right? Because that guy doesn't give a shit. He's gonna come in here, he's gonna walk straight at me, he's gonna hit me, and he's gonna withdraw, and I can't do a goddamn thing. And if you can get your opponent to think that, then you've already won, right? Because you've broken them before you've even stepped into range. And so that's what this class is gonna work on. We're gonna try to think about ways that we can kind of use just the projection of ourselves and our competence in order to, show off, right? And showing off is super important in this context. It is like the performance is the point of all of this, especially in effectual context. You are showing off. And you're showing off everything. This is not just like, oh, you can step prettily or whatever. It's like, I can hit a motherfucker if I want to, in exactly the way that I want to, and I'm not bothered by anything else, right? And how do you project that kind of air of confidence? So that's what the class is going to be about, using that, and then more practical stuff about how you close from the approach to the handwork, and how you can use that to, again, set things up and make it super fly and look really good. All right, any questions before we start? Sweet. Has anybody not seen Avatar: The Last Airbender? You haven't? Oh God. All right, you partner up with somebody who knows. We're going to talk a lot about bending and showing off that way and everything. Okay, so we're not going to need our swords right away. We're just going to do some cool posture stuff as kind of a warm-up. So just set them aside. So everybody, real quick, look at camera. Don't move. In the early modern woodcuts and artistic representations of men, here's an important thing for you. Men are sexy in the 16th century, okay? The way they're represented in art, the way that you do things, the way that you move, and the way that your body looks and your clothes look while you do them is important. That's one of the reasons for like big old poopy pants and stuff. Because when you start moving around and they swirl, it looks fucking cool, right? And that was the thing that was really important. So when you look at like woodcuts about landsnakes or Swiss mercenaries or whatever, and they've got all this peacocky, brightly colored clothes and everything, they do it because it's not enough just to be good at fencing. You have to look good at fencing too. And so one of the things that you see a lot is when people are just standing casually, they look like Cameron, right? They've got their leg emphasized, right? They're leaning, they've got the calf kind of showing off, they've got this turned kind of thing because it shows you don't give a shit, right? You're confident, you're comfortable, you're carrying yourself in a we have the kind of cliche about when you're when you see somebody walking around, it's like reading in a book or a TV show or whatever, and they're like, yeah, I knew that guy was a tough motherfucker because he walked like a martial artist or whatever, right? And I didn't believe that was a real thing until like I started doing fencing a lot, and I would notice the way that I would walk in a fencing bout, and I was like, oh shit, oh, that's real, right? It is, when somebody has confidence and they carry themselves in a certain way, it affects everything about how they stand, it affects how they move, it affects how they look when they do it. And you might not be able to spot it all the time, but it is really, really important. So one thing I want us to think about is when we're standing around like this, okay, you're on display. So when you're standing, don't just stand like modern people, right? Because modern people don't give a shit, but they don't give a shit in a slightly different way. In a way we're not really going for, right? We want to look good. And so when you're standing there, again, try to think of yourself as standing in a posture, right? That's one of the reasons that I like to use the word posture rather than guard, because it is a posture, right? So when you're standing there, try to keep your shoulders up, put your chest out a little bit, right? Stand up straight, try to get your shoulders over your hips, right? And then it's going to make you, it makes you feel a little different, right? Have you ever done like yoga and they talk about this? Like do the big stretches right before a big interview or something like that, because it changes how you think about stuff, right? And so like this is important. This, you never see people, at least in woodcuts, obviously they're not photography, but nobody's slouching around in the 16th century. You know who they show slouching around? Peasants and brigands and people that don't matter, right? Because if you matter, you act like it. And that's part of the game. That's part of the show. Is that when you're standing there in a corner getting ready in a tournament bout, you'll see people doing like this, bouncing around and doing whatever, and that's fine. But I'm going to be a hell of a lot more intimidated if I'm standing across, the bout and I see somebody like Cameron just standing there, just waiting. Like, I don't care, I do this all the time, right? So that's one thing. Whenever we pause, right, just think about how you look. Think about how you would look to people if they're deciding to look at you. Take a ballet position, right? I don't care. But so keep that in mind, right? So a lot of this is going to be about, again, looking upright and confident. You know, think about it like you're in a job interview, and you have to project an air of competence. Otherwise, they're not going to call you back, right? Okay, so keep that in mind. So second thing, here's what we're going to do. We're going to grab a partner, and you're going to, Cameron, can I borrow you again? So we're going to stand pretty far away from each other. And what we're going to do is we're not going to advance, but we're going to bend at each other, right? And this is a super fun warm-up. All you're going to do is just do stupid kung fu bullshit. I don't care what it is. Do stuff like this, right? The idea is to look fucking cool, right? And if I do something like that, he knows I'm sending something at him, so he's got to block it or he's got to counter, right? And that's it. Just play around. I don't care. You're never going to get closer than that. But the idea is, again, use the space that you have, it's just your body, to try to look intimidating and competent and cool, right? And just go for it. You're going to look silly, but all of us are going to look silly. So join in. All right, who here has ever seen a Western movie? All right, Western, never seen a Western. Oh wait, never? Do modern ones count? Are we still going? Okay. All right. So one of the classic things in a Western, right, is the showdown. Right? So if you've got like High Noon. If you haven't seen a Western, High Noon is a great one to start with. Or there's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which I'm only not going to use because it has 3 people rather than 2. But anyway, right, there's the showdown. And the showdown is, Alex, take a step closer, right? The showdown has very distinct phases. And you can break it up and discuss it almost as if it is an engagement in Meyer, because there is an approach phase, right? There is a time where the two of them kind of stride out onto the street, right? And think of the classic dusty western street, right? So dirt road, there's a tavern over there, and there's probably like, you know, a church over there, and that's it. It's just windblown, horrible bullshit. Because it's filmed in Italy and they didn't have anything there. But they have this moment where they have time, right? They stop the distance they're gonna have, and there's a time for them to stare each other down and intimidate one another, right? This happens in like every Western. And the thing is that they both try to use this, right? And there's ways like what's gonna happen is we're gonna pull our guns and try to shoot each other. And that's the thing, right? That's gonna happen no matter what. But if I can get him shaky, if I can get him thinking, oh no, I got kids, right? I shouldn't have shot that guy, or whatever, right? If I can get him off his balance, then maybe I'm gonna be quicker, maybe, right? So the thing in most Westerns is they have a narrative and there's like a story and everything, and obviously we don't have that right now, and we don't need to make it up. But they have this, there's this thing that's just pure body language, right? And some of the great Western actors became super popular not because they were actually good actors, but because they had really great physicality. So somebody like John Wayne, not a good actor, really, right? But he has this tremendous physicality where he just kind of embodies this thing. He strides, and he's got so much swagger that you just want to look at him, even if every time he opens his mouth, you forget the magic, right? Right? Or Clint Eastwood, and he's got this absolute just menace presence on the screen, even when he's a good guy. And what you want to do, what we're going to do next is try to cultivate that, right? You can do the same thing. Rather than doing earthbending shit, it's going to be like a Western showdown, right? So you have, the trick is, you can't move that much. You just have to do it with how you're standing and how you're leaning, and just a little bit, because if you're just kind of going around like, hey, part, or whatever, it's got the clown. You're going to do the opposite of what you want to do. So you can't move much. But you have to show off this physical menace that tells the other guy, like, as soon as you try to pull that gun from your holster, you're dead, right? And how do you do that without words? Right? That's the trick. So go for it. We're just have a lot of silent people staring at each other. So again, no, seriously, just partner up and do it. Yeah. And if you want to do the trick, you know, like try to make the pull and see if you could beat the other guy, right? Go for it. Just play around for 5 minutes. All right, we going?
I'm not kidding. I know the horse that will drink all your booze if you lose.
Are we going? Yeah. Okay. Alrighty, so now you got a story, right? So a sword is fun because if you're not a confident person, but you have a sword, you at least have a sword, right? So it simplifies things. So it's sort of like we pretended to have a gun, but a gun sometimes will have the same sort of presence. Like having something in your hands, being able to carry something, it'll cheat a little bit. You can kind of amp up your physicality because you have a sword, right? And if you look around the room, you'll see people carrying swords in various ways, or leaning on them, or posturing with them, or whatever. And that's just something to notice. Just how people carry swords sort of says a lot about them, right? How they stand says a lot about them. And so again, what we want to do is take that kind of attitude and project it into this approach phase of the fight, right? Because like, all right, let's not think about Meyer for a second, but how many of you have been to tournaments and competed at tournaments? Okay, so most of you, great. When does the tournament bout start? Right? When would you consider, okay, now I'm starting now. What?
Walking into the ring.
Walking into the ring.
When
Okay.
you start traveling.
When you start traveling? Yeah.
You're just mean mugging on the freeway.
When you're told that you're up next,
When they've yelled at you to take your spot.
Sure. What are you saying? In your corner, yeah. I think it's if you want to draw a line, it's when you're in the corner, right? Because you've got time, you're standing there, and the judge is saying stuff or whatever, and the timekeepers are getting ready, and they're setting up for all this, and you are just there. And now you're there, right? And now there's an audience, and now there's an opponent that you have across from you, and he's looking at you, and you can't tell because they're wearing a mask, and you're wearing a mask, and your clothes are all uncomfortable. And if you've done this a lot, it still makes you nervous, right? You're never going to get rid of that. But then what happens? You go and fence and then you're comfortable. Hopefully, right? But then every single time you step into the ring, you step into your corner, you've got that moment where you realize like, okay, you're sizing up your opponent and they're sizing you up. And there's that sort of palpable sense, right? Whether you're intimidated or not, whether you're showing you're intimidated or not, if you are, right? And like all of us do that. Right? The most confident person on earth will sometimes look at another person and be like, oh, fuck. It's just something that's innate, you can't prevent it. And so the thing is, right, we either want to trick ourselves through sort of tricking our posture to make ourselves look super cool and confident, like we're going to kick the shit out of everybody, or you want to have the attitude. So if you have the attitude already, you can just leave the class, it's no big deal. But if you don't, right, what are some ways that we can trick ourselves into feeling more confident, right? So again, you're in your suit, you got all your poofy pants, hopefully, you've got your cool mask and everything else, and what's a way that you can project confidence through that, right? Because like Alex pointed out for the showdown one, right, one of our biggest tools for showing kind of our confidence and stuff is cover. We can't use it, right? We've only got eyes. But even when you're wearing a fencing mask, you don't have anything. You don't have a face, right? You might have bees on your mask, and that's something. But so what are some ways that you can do without using your face, which is one of our greatest tools for communication, to communicate to your opponent, I don't give a shit, I'm going to hit you. Fuck it. Yeah.
Relaxed, strong posture, right? Standing up straight.
Come and show off, yeah. So give me a relaxed, strong posture. Yeah, look at that. The head's high, the chin's up, right? The chest is pulled up and kind of puffed out a little bit.
He's literally showing off his spine.
Yeah, relaxed feet, right? And that's different, right? If I was watching two people square off to fence and I saw somebody standing like that, just waiting for the bell to go so they could fence, I saw the other guy like this, right? This isn't intimidating to me. That guy's just wasting energy. He's probably wasting energy because he's nervous and he has to move, right? He's got to get the jitters out somehow, so he's bouncing around, right? But that's a choice that you can make to show something off, right? Are you wasting energy because you just really fit and you don't have to worry about it? Maybe. Are you doing it because you're super fast and you can't wait for the gate to go down so you can charge out, right? It's a choice you can make. It's not a choice I would make personally, but it's a choice you can make. And it's up to you to sort of find out how you want to display that, how you want to deal with whatever it is that you have to deal with to make yourself look strong and confident and tough and able, right? Because if you can get your opponent to think, oh, I'm going to lose, then you're halfway there. You just have to go through the motions. And we can all go through the motions. That's easy. That's the kind of thing we practice all the time, right? So here's the thing. All we're going to do is, we're going to partner up again. We're actually going to do groups of 3. We're going to have
two people squaring off. We're going to have one person as the judge, right? And you just give them an arbitrary time to just like start walking forward. You're not going to fence yet. You're just going to stand in your corner and try to win this intimidate off without using your head, right? Without using your face. Okay? Go ahead. And so, again, there's a different energy between judge says go and I just calmly walk out and start fighting, right? Versus like immediately getting up into a posture. It's like, oh, now I'm fencing. Because it's different. I'm not fencing here, now I'm fencing, right? Or, I'm sure we've all seen it, judge says go and somebody goes, right? Because they get in the middle and they want the middle because they don't want to be forced around to the edge. So they rush out and they're definitely fencing, right? So, again, that's a choice. You can do that if you think it's going to benefit your fencing, right? And that choice is something you can make for a variety of reasons. But that energy says something about you, right? So again, the difference between judge says go and calmly walk out like this, right? That's somebody who knows how to fence. That's somebody confident because they're not rushing anything. They're not trying to like, oh, I need the advantage of being in the center. Because if I'm in the center, I have the advantage of being in the center. So I better get there. I better rush. Versus somebody who just kind of calmly steps out and sets their left foot forward, right? That's somebody who knows what they're doing. So again, try to cultivate that energy, right? Where you want to look confident. And whether you just walk straight at them, or walk to the side, or do whatever, it's going to say a lot about your approach. Both as a fencer and the phase of the fight that we're in. Okay, so just concentrate on those first 2 or 3 steps. Keep going. All right, so we'll do one more thing in sort of this thing, and then we're going to do some posturing, and it's going to be super cool. I expect most of you already know how. I've seen most of you do good posturing stuff since we started, so that's fine. But the last thing that I want to do, okay, is what do you do when you get into range, right? So into range, again, being hammer god at one point, right? About here, right? And so I remember a comment made about my fencing one day. Somebody said, like, you know, talking about this kind of advancing from the corner and sort of confidence and everything is like I'd start here and I'd just start walking forward and I'd do 2 or 3 steps and then I'd like stop and take a posture. And they were like, why do you do that? It's so scary. And I was like, oh, is it? I didn't know. And so like I started trying it. It was just like, I'm just gonna walk out of my corner and approach and I'm not gonna stop, right? And it completely fucking changed how I approached everything, right? Because I realized like, oh, I intimidate people. That's weird. I don't think about that, right? And so how you approach from that Zufechten range into now we're fencing is also a component of this, right? And we'll talk about mechanically how you actually do that. And the secret is it's usually just you make a cut, right? But how you actually decide I'm starting to fence, I'm approaching the fencing, now I'm fencing is another choice that you can use to do things. And so like it might be something that's more beneficial for you to take those 2 or 3 steps out and just kind of form a posture and say, come on at me, right? I'm ready. Versus, you might just kind of walk out at somebody and just throw a cut, right? And you're not even slowing down, you're just throwing a cut, because you can't. We all practice throwing cuts all the time. You don't have to slow down, you just do it, right? And this is connected to the idea of footwork we talked about yesterday, right? Because if your idea of footwork is this very precise, very prescriptive thing, you can't just do this and throw a krumpau while you're striding around. You should be able to. You should be able to use all sorts of different footwork for any cut you want, right? There shouldn't be a difference between if you're strolling out from the Zufechten here, throwing a spherical like this, right? It's not different. You're just doing it at the same pace, right? So, as you approach, right, now you've got starting the fight. How would you start the fight? Are you going to stop and take a stance? Are you fencing somebody who's going to do this? Right? Because that's going to be different. And it's going to, because if Cameron and I have the exact same energy, right, and walk at each other, just real calmly and smoothly, like we're going to make very different decisions based on whether or not Cameron's a spaz, and it's going to do that thing where he rushes into the, yeah, I'm going to approach this bozo a whole lot differently than I would approach the calm, collected, scary Cameron, right? And so that's the thing, right? And again, you can play with this. You can play with the ideas like, do you want to come off looking aggressive? Do you want to come off looking careful? Do you want to come off looking kind of quick and deadly and fast? And right, Meyer has this whole thing where he says, hey, you know there are actually only 4 types of fencers? Right? Who read that part of the book? Yeah. So there's 4 fencers. And we'll break it down a little bit later. But essentially, there are reckless jerks who are probably not very great at fencing. There are people who are way more passive than they should be. They constantly retreat from you no matter what you do. There are people who will attack you, but they won't do any work to set it up. And then there are people who are either giant dinguses or very, very clever. Right? And Meyer doesn't say one is better than the other. He says you have to be each of these things every time. You have to be able to embody these sort of different approaches and temperaments in a fight in order to be the best fencer you can be. Right? So try to think about that, right? Do you want to come off as a big spaz? Because that might actually benefit you. If you're fencing somebody who's somebody who is also maybe a big spaz, or maybe somebody who is really careful with their attacks, maybe even throwing a flurry of cuts is going to discombobulate them enough that you can open them up and hit them, right? Versus if somebody is super aggressive and reckless, right? This kind of like unbothered calm really throws them off. And you can see sometimes like certain fencers will set the energy level of a bout, right? And you can go and look at these guys and you can see like, you'll see this guy like jumping around and fencing, bopping, and then they'll come up against somebody who's just like, what are you doing, man? And you can see that other guy just like, oh, fuck. Right? And you just see them just like they have no idea what to do because their tricks don't work, because they're not thinking about them. They're just doing them because that's how they fence. And they're not able to cultivate the energy that they want. And that's what this is all about, right? So, same sort of thing. Now you've got weight in your corner, you've got the first 2 or 3 strides, and you have the first action of the fight. So go ahead and play with that. Alrighty, gather it. So, one of the ways that Meyer actually talks about his 4 types of fencers is I'm going to restrain myself from getting into my theories about it, but one of the terms he uses for the type 1 fencer is that this is the type of fencer who cultivates frenzy. Everybody remember that term? Right? If you've read it, they're about the 4 types of fencers, right? And I think this is one of the best turns of phrase in the whole book, right? We all know what that looks like. We all know the kind of fencers who cultivate frenzy, right? And it's the same thing. It's the guy rushing out to the center, right? Because what's another way we can kind of describe that kind of behavior?
Sports fencer.
Violent. Sports fencer, violent, sure.
Volatile.
Volatile, yeah.
Buffalo.
A buffalo, what's that? Reckless, sure. Right, these are all like synonyms that he uses for the type 1 fencer, right? But like, for our purpose, the opposite of cultivating frenzy would be what? Anybody have an idea?
Cultivating
this is not
serenity.
necessarily a thing that's in Meyer. He talks around it, but there's one particular term that I really like. Collected is a good one, sure. Vicious? Judicious. That is what Meyer uses for sure. That's the opposite of cultivating frenzy. Somebody who is judicious. You make the right decisions for the right reasons because you're calm and you're sober. Right? It's both probably physically and just temperamentally. Right? Yeah.
Embodying serenity.
Embodying serenity. That's a really interesting one. What is one particular word that means that exactly? Anybody know? It's Italian.
Sprezzatura.
Say it again.
Sprezzatura.
Right. Has anybody heard that term before?
Sprezzatura.
Right? Yeah. Who has heard the term before? Sprezzatura.
Nope.
No? I expected way more of all of you. I'm disappointed. Sprezzatura is not a Meyer term. It's an Italian term that it's actually used to talk quite a lot about courtiers. It was not invented by the guy, but it comes from a guy named Baldassare Castiglieri. And Baldassare Castiglieri wrote a book that's about courtiers, right? People who are sort of pages and apprentices and squires of a court in Italy, right? And he talks about the best courtiers are also the best fencers, so keep that in your pocket. But also, the best courtiers have cultivated Sprezzatura. And Sprezzatura means sort of embodying serenity, but it also means like an effortlessness about what they're doing, right? So for our purposes, that means like not only do you need to embody the kind of energy that you want, but you have to do it in a way that looks like effortless, right? So if somebody were to come out and stick in a posture, right? So Chris, just come out and take a posture, right? Does that look like he's trying hard? No. I mean, he looks pretty relaxed, right? So it's like there's a difference between me and all right, I'm going to be in flute, whatever, I'm hanging out. So I'm just kind of looking around and seeing what's going to happen, right? Versus like, right? We're both like making an effort that looks strenuous, right? Yeah.
I don't know, fight casual.
Sorry?
I don't know, fight casual.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what we're going for, is you want to look casual. You want to look like you do this shit every day. I don't care if you do. I don't care if you haven't picked up a sword in 6 months. You want it to look like this is your natural state, right? You want to look more tense when you're sleeping than when you're swinging a sword. And if you can do that, right, that says a lot about your temperament. It says a lot about how collected you are. It says a lot about how in control you are. It says a lot about how, again, literally, you don't give a shit. But there's a difference between being suicidal and reckless and not giving a shit, and not giving a shit because you're so confident there's nothing that they can do to harm you, right? So that's what we want to do. So what we're going to do is play around with postures, and we're going to get people to just take postures. I don't care what they are. Let's just go through some. So everybody get up.
I was just waiting for you to attack me. I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
I was like, at what point shall I?
No. So we want to just look. So, all right, we're just going to start with bump talk. Everybody getting bump talk. Right? So remember, you want to look like this shit you do every day. You're just up here because it happens to be the most convenient way to beat the shit out of your opponent. Right? And if I'm going to be here, it's whatever. It's fine. I can go to the grocery store like this. Right? I'm going to walk around, I'm going to have my bag of groceries up above my head like this, because why not? It's just comfortable, it's casual, right? Now I want everybody to try real hard. Really get into it. And really, yeah, make a mean mug with your face, like really stress yourself out, right? And it's like, there's a difference between, you see somebody like playing baseball or doing any kind of other sport, right? Where you can relax. Keep that tension. Where you see somebody like really whiff on a baseball pitch, right? Like they're up there and they're ready to bat and everything, and they really miss. And you can just see every muscle in their body straining so hard. They desperately wanted to hit that ball. Versus somebody who just kind of goes up and the bat does all the work, right? And so it's like this sense of confidence, the sword is going to do all the work that we really focus. So, we got bump talk, right? Now let's go down to over. So again, try to be as relaxed as possible, right? Again, you're doing this every day. Now, of course, relaxed doesn't mean unready. You have to be able to fence from here. So if you can't, when you're just totally relaxed, then don't. Sprezzatura is not worth it if you're going to die. Then again, according to Balthazar, it might be. You might rather die in the attempt than otherwise, right? All right, so now again, really tense up. Really make yourself look, oh, I'm over. I'm going to get you, right? I know, relax. Go to exit. I don't care what side. Same thing, right? We're just like wind the tension and then relax in each posture. Just go through. I don't care which ones. Do postures on both sides. Do the big ones, right? Try to flow through. So get yourself some room. And what I would say is like do like a quick flow drill, right? Start at like bump tog and kind of go through in a cut thing. Do one or two, hit a few postures, and for the first one, try to be as relaxed as possible. Try to make it look casual, slow even. And then, white knuckle grip your sword, put all your energy into it, try to mean mug and do the exact same flow drill. But then try hard, right? That's where that term comes from. What's the opposite of Sprezzatura? A try hard. Or if you're a gaming vocation, we call it real sweaty. Right? Get real sweaty. thing to kind of keep in mind is that there tends to be a fairly predictable curve when people do martial arts or athletics or whatever. And a lot of it is, well, like when you start, you actually use a ton more energy than you need to because you're fresh, right? Your body's all loaded up and it's got everything it needs, so it pours everything it needs to into each action you take, right? And you can see that as like this sort of energy curve goes away, as you get more tired, you actually use less energy because your body's like, hey man, slow down, right? But in terms of the performance that you're doing, actually gets better at this kind of sweet spot in the middle where you're tired enough that your body's kind of pumping endorphins and stuff into you so that you actually kind of slow down and don't hurt yourself. But at the same time, you're still in a headspace where you're not exhausted, that your performance actually doesn't suffer. And that's the kind of sweet spot we want to get. But we want to get that without actually exhausting ourselves, right? And so if you can start a fight being very relaxed and using only the amount of energy that you need to, and sort of matching your opponents, or maybe 1/2 step faster than them if you need to, right? Then you can actually fence like a lot longer because you're not trying hard, like physically. You're just doing the thing. And if you can cultivate that kind of attitude, where you just start off, and you can fight all the natural impulses to like be intimidated and to be frightened and to be nervous and pumped up and everything like that, you actually kind of hit that sweet spot earlier and stay in longer, and it'll make you a better fencer. And it'll make you look fucking cool because you'll be all in Sprezzatura the whole time. And everybody's like, man, that guy, or gal, or envy. Fence is real cool. I want to be like that person, right? That's what we want to do. So let's keep doing again some more posture work, and then we're going to talk about sort of tactically, mechanically, how are we going to close from the Zufechten into fencing. So keep going. Go cultivate some frenzy for a couple minutes. Right? And the nice thing about, keep going as I talk, the nice thing about the postures, right, is they give you these little moments, even if you're moving the whole time, to really kind of make sure that you look real good, and you look real collected, and you look real calm, right? These are like anchor points within your movements. These are moments that you linger in for no longer than the blink of an eye, right? But if you can do like we worked yesterday with that round strike, right? You kind of get into this. There's a big, like you cannot do it if you're cultivating frenzy, because you're going too fast for your body to be able to collect in that moment to do the thing you need to, right? So fencing slowly, fencing with Sprezzatura, is actually more beneficial because it gives you more time to do the thing right rather than do the thing fast, right? And I feel like a lot of fencers tend to approach this stuff as, if you do it fast, you're gonna win. Do it fast, right? You can fence so fast, but nobody can catch you. Well, you're fencing so fast that you're out fencing yourself, and you don't want to do that. All right, that's enough cultivating Sprezzatura. We're gonna work on that for the rest of your lives. So come on, gather around, children. Story time. No, not really. We're gonna talk about it tomorrow. You don't need to sit down. Now that you have, what's the best way to cultivate Sprezzatura? Just sit. Just lounge on a couch.
No, you gotta sit like this.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. All right. So what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about the options that you have to close that distance from approach to the middle, right? And now, in a perfect world, you'd be able to decide every little bit of this, right? You can just choose. I'm going to enter this way. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to hit, and I'm going to withdraw. However, what is the complication that we have as fencers? We don't have the choice. There's another fencer there who's doing similar stuff, right? They can throw a monkey wrench into the works. And there is a thing, we talked a little bit about it with one group, that this stuff only works on people who can fence, right? If there is somebody out there who is utterly blank about the kind of like energy you put out and the kind of posturing that you're doing and the signals that you're sending as a fencer of like your intent and your purpose, and they're completely, utterly oblivious to it, it's not going to work. You can't trick somebody like that because they're too dense. They don't actually understand what's going on. They're just trying to hit you, right? Yeah.
They might also be a type 4 fencer who is like.
It is
could
possible,
be
right?
one or the
But it would work with a type 4 fencer. It would work with the good kind of type 4 fencer, right? Because if there's somebody who is just faking it and making themselves look like a dingus, right? then you can still trick them because they're not a dingus. They're just trying to trick you, and you can see through it, right? And we can very, very, very quickly get into the 4D chess of fencing, right? Because like, okay, I see him over there, he looks pretty relaxed, but what if he's not relaxed? What if he's trying to fake it? What if he is relaxed, he's very relaxed, and he's, oh no, right? Like, you can very easily spin yourself into a decision paralysis where you're not actually gonna be able to fence. And if you can do that to your opponent, holy shit. Man, you'll be unstoppable.
Forward psychological.
Yeah, but you also don't want to get your opponent who would have been confident otherwise so intimidated that all they do is flail, because then you can't fence them. Then they're just going to be flailing, right? So anyway, all of that is to say, we have the benefit of working with people who are fluent in the language of fencing, or at least can speak the language of fencing, which is posturing, right? It's movement, it's body language, it's eye contact to a slight extent. You can in a mask, but it's hard, right? But we can use it here in the class. So the idea is, right, we're going to have somebody, Kat, if you could borrow, I could borrow you, right? So we're going to start in that same thing. We're both going to try to cultivate Sprezzatura in our corners, and we're going to approach, and we're going to do like an A and a B fencer sort of a thing, right? So the A fencer is going to choose how they engage, but the B fencer can choose whatever they want, right? So when your judge says go, Kat can choose what type of fencer she's going to be, right? So the A fencer is just going to sit there and kind of watch. Give yourself just a little bit of time to perceive the energy they're putting out. And as the B fencer, feel free to do whatever you want. Cultivate frenzy all I want. Be as Sprezzatura as you want. Be just complete dense, just stand. I don't care. Do whatever you want, right? Because that's a puzzle for you to try to solve. What's the energy you need to go out to approach this and get into range with an advantage, right? Because ultimately this whole game is only about one thing. It is closing to the middle with an advantage. That's all you could ever expect to do, right? And so if Kat is going to be very obliging, and she's going to approach me in just this Nebenhood, right? My approach is very, very easy. All I'm going to do is this. I'm going to get my sword in the way. I have an advantage. I'm going to hit her, and I'm going to leave. Right? And I want to do it with exactly that energy. It's like, oh, cool, this is easy. Are we fencing? Right? That kind of thing, right? But not everybody's going to be that easy. But the only thing that we can expect to do, all these mind games and things that we're talking about, is all about literally just one single blade engagement where you have an advantage you can take advantage of, right? And so what do I mean when I say advantage? What specifically am I looking for? No, Chris. Yeah. Sure, but that's just a synonym. Yeah.
Looking for openings.
For openings, right. What does that mean?
Seeing where they are protecting themselves and where they're likely to be able to protect
Right.
themselves and choosing something based on that.
Right, so strong and weak, right? That's the thing, right? Weak doesn't always mean bad. You can be deliberately weak and you can still win a fight. That's fine, right? It just gives you different options, right? And then what else? The 4 and the 9, yeah. So the example that we just had, me and Kat standing sort of passively in Nebenhood, right? What am I not doing? What is the very obvious response that I could have to somebody with a withdrawn posture that most type 1 fencer, let's say, would immediately go for? What's the obvious thing?
You just hit him.
You just hit him, right? I'm gonna come out. Oh, she want to draw a card. Bam! I'm gonna hit her in the head. But what does she do? Oh, she hits me in the hands. That's fine. You know, I'd rather trade that for a hit to the head, sure, but it's not fencing, right? So what we want is that advantage, that first crossing. What I'm actually doing is taking her opening, right? I've prevented her utterly from being able to do anything to me in the next action. So I have a free action. They call it in chess like n+1, right? I have this next action, it's mine. I can do whatever I want to do. So I can go in with a thrust, I can go in with a cut. She might respond, she might be super quick, she might be a good fencer, but that's, the Zufechten game's done at that point. I'm not going to be like, oh shit, I missed, and then hop back and then do my Zufechten game again, because we're fencing, we're in the middle. It's a different phase of the fight. Okay, so what I want you to do is, again, as the person, the passive, the Hans, the person who's going to lose this exchange, what you want to do is try to embody the energy that you want your winning fencer to deal with, right? So get in a posture, get in a specific thing, try to tell them before you get there what you're going to do so that they can choose the right response, and get the advantage in that bind. You don't have to continue after that. All you want to do is see whether or not you read them properly and that you can get to that advantageous cross. And if you do, great, you're done. That's all you can expect to do with the Zufechten. That's it. All of this very complicated stuff we spent an hour and a half working on literally comes down to a single crossing of the sword. Right? So make sure that you have an advantage. Make sure that you know whether you're strong or weak, or whether you're for and not. You can be weak as long as you're strong, or I mean, as long as you're in the for, right? You can be in the not as long as you're strong, right? Like, don't be weak and in the not because you'll probably get hit. That's me here in City. You're gonna get hit every time, right? But again, what's another word for all this stuff that we're talking about? Yeah, index. That's the one. Yes, right? Knowing where you are in the fight. That's index. You can do that from here. You can be an index here. I'm sure James would disagree, right? But the idea is knowing where you are and having that inform your next actions. That's index, right? So make sure you do it. All I can do is hope that I've read cat correctly so that I make the right response so that when we cross our swords, I have an advantage. And the Zufechten game's over. Okay? So work on that. Just go ahead and cultivate index. Just go. Do it.
Elements.
So, again, the Zufechten ends about here. Anything closer than this is middle. What we want to do is get across in the middle, which means our swords are crossing at the middle. So I've already seen a couple of people who end up in a cross that's like this. Right? This is too close. Right? You've squandered an opportunity that you had to take advantage, get in the middle, and you've closed to a range where what's probably going to happen is you're going to double. Right? So what I want to do is, using the older terminology, you want to end up with your point about half an L from your opponent's face. An L is about roughly the distance between the elbow and the tip of your fingers. Right? It's about 8 to 10 inches or so. And what that does is you get that cross, right? I'm in this nice door posture, you get that cross, your next step, your next action will hit that. Right? All I have to do is that. Just a simple easy step. If you're any closer than that, it's going to throw everything off and you've wasted all the work you've done in the Zufechten. So it's better to be farther back than it is to be closer. So just keep that in mind and keep going. So there are a couple things that I deliberately kept out because I knew that if I started talking about it, we would spend 900 years doing just this, right? And it's, a couple of you brought it up when I was going around talking, it's provokers, right? The one thing that we haven't really done is the issue of using the Zufechten to provoke specific actions or specific responses, either in an active or a passive way, a strong or a weak way, right? And just to leave you with more thoughts that we can't really drill or talk about in much depth, there are, I think, I term two ways that Meyer uses provokers. And I call them strong and weak provokers, right? And can somebody tell me what you think a strong provoker might be? Yeah.
When you're going to be cutting through an opening or have a shot at them if they didn't carry it.
Yeah, right? You're in the for, right? You have the first action. You force them to respond or get hit, right? So the nice thing about a provoker is that it can very easily just become a hitter, depending on if your opponent's a dingus or not, right? So those active provokers are really nice because if somebody's just lingering in a posture, they're not moving, they're not giving you an opportunity that you can take advantage of, you just go to hit them and they parry it or they don't. And if they parry it, you've got a second action already chambered up and ready to go. What would be a weak provoker? Yeah.
Where you're cutting more at their blade as opposed to their body?
Maybe. Yeah.
Leaving an opening.
Yeah, leaving an opening, right? So like the difference is, Alex, you stand up, right? Alex is going to be just stay up in Mumtag. And I've got a couple ways I can approach this, right? One of them is just, what? I thrust toward his face. And he's got to deal with that. He has to. Or he's going to have a really bad dentist bill, right? So he's going to probably try to come down and parry. Because I know that he's going to do that, I've already got my second action loaded up. And I'm going to take advantage, and then I'm going to hit him, and I'm going to withdraw, right? The other way I could do that is just like, oh, look at me, I don't know what offense, no, what's this? And then I can lean in and expose a big juicy opening that they can't resist, right? I'm going to give them a bargain they can't refuse. And they're going to cut to my head, And I know that that's going to happen, so I've got my action chambered up and ready to go, right? And I'm going to hit it. And then I'm going to withdraw. So that's something to think about too, is you can use those, especially those weak provokers, in that approach to get them, especially if they're a passive fencer, if they're one waiting for their advantage to go, give them one, right? Leave a big, obvious opening. Oh man, I just don't know what range is. Clearly, I'm going to get hit, right? Right. So bad. Right. And you can really trigger that person to really come at you. And if you can do that, again, you've won the fight. As long as you actually know what range is and you're not actually just going to get hit in the head. Because that can happen too, right? It takes practice, like all of it does. But that's about it. I mean, we could spend another couple of hours just working on that stuff, but I'm not going to make it. I would love to. But yeah, that's about it. So does anybody have any questions? Sweet. All right. But yeah, that's it. So that's the Zufechten. So remember that it exists. Use it, right? One of the most common things you'll see if you go just look up tournament footage of HEMA is that people will walk into middle range without having done anything, and they'll both get hit. And depending on the certain rules, one person might have actually won that exchange, but what ended up, they both got hit. They're not fencing. They're completely trashing an entire sphere of behaviors, an entire category of actions and reactions and perception that you can use to be a better fencer, and a safer fencer, and a cleaner fencer, and a prettier fencer. And all of those, I think, are things you should aspire to. That's just personally my thing. But I think paying attention to this stuff makes you not only a better fencer, but a better Meyer. And ultimately, that's kind of the whole point of this whole thing, right? So keep that in mind. Remember that Zufechten exists, and use it. And that's what I'll leave you with. All right, thank you. Pass them on.